Hey everyone, welcome back to Cosmic Alarm Clock, my slightly unhinged, unstrategic, unedited podcast where we talk about what's happening in the world through the lens of collective astrology. And I bring in historics, it's channeled, it's no bullshit, and it's here for you. I want to let you know that after this episode, the next time you'll hear from me for this podcast will be when Pluto enters Aquarius for good, which will not be until the holidays of 2024, right after the US election. Now, I am going to probably drop that episode earlier than that, maybe October, but we're going to have a break. And in that time, I am fully launching my brand, Success and Spirit. I'm doing a bunch of other stuff. And so I don't really know what's happening. I think that's the collective theme of all of us right now, business owners and not. Like there's a lot of change and we're kind of figuring some stuff out behind the scenes. So this is Jupiter and Gemini part 2. I am not going to go into why I am doing a collective discussion on Jupiter in Gemini, even though it's not an outer planet, because I already talked about that in part 1. And so this is going to be a very interesting episode because these podcasts are generally channeled and I just talk. But because I want to talk about the historics of Jupiter in Gemini, it involves dates and facts and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be kind of going back and forth and it's going to be kind of awkward and weird. I'm just going to talk. We're going to go with it. Where are we right now? Where are we is it's the July 4th holiday in the US, right after Independence Day. The last Independence Day we're going to have before Pluto enters Aquarius for good in November. I've talked about this before. We have not had Pluto in Aquarius since the late 1700s. This is a game-changing thing that does not happen very often, obviously. Last time Pluto entered Aquarius, we had the French Revolution. We had a lot of other things. And the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn is when the US formed. So I will do a deeper dive on the historics of Pluto in Capricorn and Pluto in Aquarius when I do that video or that podcast. But this is the context in which we are discussing what I'm going to discuss today. Because again, astrology is nested dolls. Jupiter is not an outer planet. And then you've got outer planets, Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. And those are what are considered collective transpersonal forces. And typically all of my stuff has been around that. But Gemini plays a role, and I'll tell you why. I did a video on my channel about the 8 things business owners need to know about Jupiter and Gemini, which is May of 2024 through, let's say, June of 2025. And I put that on this channel. So it's been crazy. And I haven't gotten around to doing this podcast. This is July 4th weekend. I got a little bit extra time. And also it's because in exactly 1 year, on July 7th of 2025, Uranus will enter Gemini. So this is really an exact preview of what is to come. Now, I've talked a lot about Gemini, but Gemini from a collective perspective is communication and technology. It's information sharing and access. It's social discourse, social awareness. It's developments in transportation. It's day-to-day transportation versus like space transportation, which would be Sagittarius. It's media. It's news. It's entertainment. It is the mind, the mutable mind, where you can get brainwashed. And it is also, I would say, related to the internet. People are going to say that Uranus is the internet, and it is, but Gemini is communication. So social media could be considered both Gemini and Uranus. They come together, work together. And that, my friends, is why I'm even doing a podcast on this, because this is a preview of what's to come. Now, we got a lot of crazy shit happening collectively. I don't need to tell you that. We've got an election that is batshit. I mean, we don't even know what's going to happen. It wouldn't surprise me if the current president in office announces that he is dropping out and we get some crazy person who comes in. I don't mean crazy like they're mentally crazy, just like crazy, like the word crazy, out of left field, steals the show. And we have this random year where this person who's just like enters the race in September wins the presidency. It is just an unpredictable fucking year. And I want to be very upfront of the fact that I am not a politician. I don't give a shit about politics because I think it's all bullshit and I think it's all brainwashing. And I'm not a historian. I did look at historics for this podcast because I'm a Virgo. I don't like saying things that are incorrect. But when I share anything about politics on this podcast, please know that it's not because I care one way or the other about either party. It's just because I'm just looking at the collective energies. Now, there is somebody who is we've had an office before that might win again. He's just been like acquitted and then like fucking the Supreme Court. And it's just crazy. And the reason why it just seems a little weird that he would be in office again, I'm not saying he would or he wouldn't, is he is so fucking old school Capricorn. White, old dude, capitalist male who literally said what he said about women on television. I mean, it's the most, old money New York business, real estate. It's the most Capricorn thing ever. So for him to be the president for the next 4 years seems a bit off. But whatever, maybe this is a transition period. I don't really know. I'm just saying that if something was to come out of left field, it wouldn't surprise me. That's the energies of the year that we're living in. What else is happening? Right now, Neptune, which is an outer planet, is at 29 degrees of Pisces. Now, this week, Neptune went retrograde at 29 degrees of Pisces just a few days ago. Okay. Neptune is the slowest moving planet in our solar system. It entered Pisces in January of 2011 or spring of 2011. I can't remember if it was January, February, March, 2011. Okay. And it's going to leave Pisces on March 31st of 2025. It will dip back in, but it'll enter Aries on March 25th of 2025, March 31st of 2025. This is relevant because it got so close to 0 degrees of Aries. It was within 4 minutes of 0 degrees of Aries, but it didn't make it. It stopped short, it retrograded, and it's going to sit at 29 degrees until the end of August. It's been at 29 degrees since the beginning of May because Neptune's a very slow planet. And so this is a big deal because this is the last degree of the zodiac. And as you know, you may or may not know, the 29th degree of any sign is the anaretic degree. It is like the holding on. And signs in astrology are generally very different as you move from one to the next. So Pisces is like mutable water and spirituality. And, I'm just going to like smoke some joint and lay out in the sun and like be in total escapism. And I've got credit card debt, but I'll be fine. And, I'll figure it out, whatever. Aries is like, oh my fucking God, I'm starting a business. I'm going to the gym. I'm taking charge of my life. It's a cardinal fire, right? Very, very different energies. And if you believe in ancient rulerships, Neptune does not rule anything. So Jupiter is the ruling planet of Pisces, right? Because the outer planets are just that. They're like these collective forces, but they have a place in our chart, but they don't. Unless you're actually having an outer planet transit, they don't have a lot of impact on your transiting chart. But if you think about the energies of Pisces, which are sleepiness and escapism and drug addiction and artist and, we are all one, collective energies, no boundaries. People, a lot of Pisces often are very mutable people. They have a lot of very porous, very empathic. And I'm not talking human design. If you have a lot of open centers, I know we're just doing astrology here. I'm not going to bring in human design. I know that that's a whole other piece to this, but they're very porous. And Neptune is associated with the same energies: sleepiness, the dream time, intuition, what you can't see, the unseen realms. So Neptune being in Pisces, we've had a lot of double energy for a very long time. And I'm going to talk through the historics now of Jupiter and Gemini, but let's just look at this in the context of Neptune in Pisces, because that period of time is going to end and we're going to leave Neptune in Pisces while Jupiter is in Gemini. And so Neptune entered Pisces in 2011. And let's think about what started at that time. We had the social media really taking off, YouTube and eventually Instagram and blah, blah, blah. I was on Facebook back in the day. I'm going to be 47 very soon. I was on Facebook back in the day. That kind of social media was very different. Anyone who knows old Gen X or a Xennial knows, Facebook was like stupid. You posted a picture of your breakfast. It was image crafting. Maybe you went on a trip with your boyfriend and you posted a picture of the two of you on the beach, whatever. It wasn't what social media is now, which is these algorithms that are addictive and business owners have to post constantly and stories and notifications. And it's this escapism, this dopamine hit that we were chasing. And you actually have to chase it if you want to succeed on it, because you have to engage all day. You have to post constantly, or you have to hire somebody to do that for you. Otherwise, you're not really going to grow on those platforms. It is built in. I used to live in Silicon Valley, and they hired psychologists from Stanford to understand how brain triggers work. And so these apps were designed with human psychology in mind, right? Think about it no different than sugar or drugs. If you think about the processed food industry, I have an MBA in brand management, and a lot of people from brand management go into what they call CPG firms, which were much bigger in the 80s before e-commerce came out, or let's say 90s or 2000s. When you think CPG companies, think Procter and Gamble, General Mills, L'Oreal, any of these companies that used to be before the internet that you would buy everything from one company. If you don't understand, Procter and Gamble owns Tampax, they own Tide, they own, one or two major companies own all the brands. You just don't know it. L'Oreal, I used to work there after business school. They own like 15 beauty brands. You just don't know it. And they continue to acquire and buy. My point being is that was what people did. And they would sell garbage to people. And how these, and this is before, now we have a health movement, and there's, influencers have their own brands, and you could be like a shop owner that's selling like skincare out of your house, and it's not, and there's environmental brands and all that. Things have changed, but this is how it used to be. These were the giants, and everyone from business school went to these companies. And I just was like refused to go to these companies because basically their entire thing is they use children's psychology. They have a two-pronged strategy. It's children's psychology to place the product in the shelf and to have graphics and copy that will then draw the child in. They even place these cereals at a child's eye level. And then the child will scream and throw a tantrum, and the tired mother will be like, fuck it, I'm just going to buy it, right? Especially, and they also target low-income mothers who may be less educated about health or whatever, more busy, maybe don't have enough time, okay? Don't have help at home, etc. And then from a food science perspective, they manufacture these foods to be addictive to your body, right? If anyone who's ever had like these like artificial potato chips or any of these kind of processed foods, it's not willpower. These are literally manufactured so that you cannot stop eating it. And then you actually feel like shit if you stop eating it. This is no different than cigarettes. This is no different than any addictive substance. And then in our society, from a medical perspective, we have gone skyrocket with pharmaceutical antidepressants for everybody. Everyone's on some type of medication. Everyone's neurodivergent, ADD, ADHD, blah, 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 depressed, yada, yada. Any psychiatrist worth their salt, and I had a woman on, she's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, will say most people don't need this medication, right? It's numbing people out to their lives. So let's add this in. You've got the shitty food. You've got social media. You've got medication. And you've got a walking zombie society. Does that sound like the America you know? I think so. And then they're tuning out with celebrity culture and whatever the news is telling us. And that is loci Gemini. So Gemini from a collective perspective is the news, okay? It is what you're hearing. And so we're in an election year. We've got AI at us, which is only going to explode next year with Uranus. Uranus, the technologist and the future, and the robot meets communication in Gemini. So that's going to be a very interesting time. Speed of communication is going to increase. But remember, our bodies haven't upgraded yet. So if you believe in human design, in 2027, we're moving to a new paradigm. And we have been moving towards there since the late 1800s. And I used to think all this was crazy. And then I started really studying human design, and I consider myself a human design expert. It's what I do in my business now. And I do astrology, but it's kind of more word of mouth and retainer. I don't just do like one-off readings anymore, at least my current iteration, just because I found that average people want really stupid bullshit sun sign stuff. And I want people who actually want to use this stuff in their real life and want to pay someone to actually tell them what to do, not like free advice on the internet and get electrocuted. Like go do that if that's what you want to do. But anyway, I have been studying this and really learning the different energy centers, and it is very interesting. And I have to say it's been quite accurate in my own experiments and experiments with clients. So if that is indeed true, and if we are indeed moving to a more energetic, differently energetic kind of self in the 2027, then a lot of our bodies, and this is going to depend on each person, but a lot of our bodies are still based in the old. And that's why we're exhausted, because we're not meant for this kind of speed. We're not meant for this kind of information overload. Our brains are not meant for it. We're meant to fuel ourselves all day. We're meant to move all day. We're not meant for like this new kind of paradigm. Something interesting last night, I was listening to somebody known as Bahar It's Daryl Anka, and he channels Bahar, who claims to be a hybrid of the Greys, which are those aliens. If you ever saw those people are abducted and they have these like big eyes and those weird cone heads, those are known as the Greys. And so Bahar claims to be a hybrid of the human and the Greys. And, you know, Daryl Anka and Bahar have been around for a very long time. He's been channeling Bahar for 40 years, well before it's cool. I'm not an expert, but it seems legit. And most people who can tell when people are acting are like, he's not acting. And again, you may or may not know, this brand started with me channeling. It was a brief incident. I channeled for about a couple of days when this brand launched. And that is how this brand launched. I'd never been in the public eye before. That might surprise you. And so all of a sudden I started channeling Kali, live streaming Kali on the internet from someone who'd never been online before. I can just tell you that channeling is real. You know, this is kind of channeled, but that's not the same kind of channel. That was real channeling, where you take on a separate entity and it comes through you. So at any point, I was listening to him last night and he's like, well, we used to eat, but we don't really eat. And he's like, we don't sleep anymore. And et cetera, et cetera. And there are a lot of human design types in human design, depending on their PHS, the primary health system, that depending on your arrows, you might move less, you might need to eat less often. A lot of people need to eat in indirect light versus direct light. It all sounds asinine. It all sounds crazy. I have a master's in nutrition and functional medicine. I understand the body from a very, very scientific biological perspective. And a lot of it just makes no goddamn sense. But I'm open. That's the thing with me. I'm open to, hey, maybe shit's changing, right? There's no ego with how things used to be. And that's what this Pluto on the last degree of Capricorn, it's holding on. You're seeing this with the politics. You're seeing this with abortion. You're seeing this with every fucking thing. Everyone is holding on. You're seeing this with people in the workforce and holding on to people going back to being in the office. And I think there's going to be a fundamental game-changing shift in the world of work in 2025. There's so many people holding on by a thread right now because they have to, because the economy is bad and the fear-mongering around the economy and all of that. If you listen to this podcast, you like this stream of consciousness, and if you're looking for like tell me the 5 things I need to know in 5 minutes, this isn't the podcast for you because it's free. This is what the fuck I do. This is a thing. So I was listening to a podcast with Grant Cardone, who's a famous real estate guy. Some people think he's a sham, whatever, rich guy. And Lewis Howes. Lewis Howes is a personal development personality. He has a show called School of Greatness. Very, very mainstream kind of, quote, business meets spirit podcast. Mostly business. Sometimes he has spiritual people on there, right? And I happened to come across this podcast from Grant, or it was a video podcast of Grant Cardone on there. And Grant Cardone said a few things, and it made me go back and check the date of the podcast. And he was talking about how we're living in an environment of fear. And he was talking about how people are talking about inflation and this and this and this and all this stuff, and how it's all a fucking game to keep us small and to keep us afraid. And you've heard me say that throughout this entire podcast if you've been listening since the beginning. Now, I know not all of the podcast episodes are on YouTube, but I've been doing this podcast since I started channeling, which was April of 2022. I looked at when he said that, and it was May of 2023, which was right after Pluto. It was March of 2023. It was right when Pluto went into Aquarius the first time. So since that time, Pluto's been dancing with this last degree of Capricorn, or the later degrees of Capricorn. And Capricorn, again, structures of society, fear, old white men, patriarchy in not a good way, right? And all of those things. And so I just thought it was really interesting because there's all these different data points coming in from different places that are all kind of saying the same thing. Okay, so where am I going with this? Numbed out society. So now you've got a numbed out society that's on the verge of collapse, and a period of time where I believe everyone's going to wake the fuck up. And that's going to be spring of 2025. Now, not everyone's going to wake up, but if you're awake, cosmic alarm clock, hello, you better wake the fuck up if you have it. It's going to be a time when we have to take care of ourselves. Aries is a pioneer. It jumps off a cliff. It's a fool. It's a risk taker, and it's cardinal fire, and it's doing stuff for you versus for everybody else. It's putting your oxygen mask on first. And that is what's going to be very, very important in 2025 and beyond. It's already important if it's not obvious to you. The government's not going to take care of you. A company's not going to take care of you. No one's going to fucking take care of you, right? We think we know that. I don't think you need me to tell you that. So that's what's happening. And then finally, I just thought I'd point out, because we're talking about the news, we're talking about corruption, and then I'll go into the historics, because I can't channel and talk like dates at the same time. So let me finish this portion, and then part 2 of this podcast, I'm going to talk about the historics of Jupiter and Gemini, what to expect, etc. It might be interesting to you to see the patterns and cycles. Remember, astrology is just fucking cycles and patterns. It's just themes and all of that stuff. Okay, it's not psychic. A couple of things that have happened. Now, we already talked about, I talked in the last podcast about people had said it's the year of the reckoning. We're seeing stuff happening with P. Diddy. Since I saw that episode, a couple of things have come out that I find interesting. And one is that court case that happened in Atlanta with Young Thug. I'm like a Gen X woman. I don't really understand who all these people are, but it was a court case. And then the judge did something in chambers, which is completely you don't do, which is you have like a secret discussion. You don't involve the defense. I'm not a lawyer, but you're not allowed to have all these secret meetings and then not tell the other side. The lawyer found out about it. The defense lawyer found out about it, brought it up, and the judge was so pissed off that the lawyer brought it up and kind of pointed out his mistake that he said that the judge is going to go to jail. Unheard of. Insane. And there's a couple of, quote, positives. Number one, now court TV has become a big fucking business on YouTube, right? There's so many channels and law channels that are doing buka bucks, right, on covering court cases. And so the public is now watching. And this particular lawyer is a very, very famous lawyer in Atlanta who has a lot of backing of the local bar. So what happened is that people stormed the courthouse, lawyers stormed the courthouse. There was a lot of public scrutiny. The judge's motion where the guy had to go to jail was thrown out. And eventually, just this week, finally, the judge had to recuse himself, which he refused to do until finally he was forced to do that. This week in Massachusetts, where I am from, there was a Karen Reed case. Now, if you can believe this, I live in the state and I didn't even know this was happening. That's how much I do not watch the news. That's a pretty hard thing to be able to avoid. A trial that is, I don't live on the South Shore, but I can't believe I'd never heard of this. I'm thankful because the whole thing would have been disturbing to listen to. But the bottom line is this involved a woman who, whether or not she killed her boyfriend or not, I don't even know. But the bottom line is the local cop mafia, and the South Shore has this Irish kind of mafia that is the police department, basically covered up. And there's a lot of weird evidence tampering and loss of evidence and lying. And there's a lot of bullshit going on. Okay. And so they declared a mistrial. And everyone is saying, how the fuck did this even get this far? And now we're going to have to pay, people on my state are going to have to pay for a retrial. And she's never going to get convicted because it's just, there's too much bullshit. There's too much that's come out that there's too much, if evidence tampering, once you mess up a crime scene, you can't go back. The point is that there's no way she's going to get tried for this. And so in a very short amount of time, and the reason I bring this up is because Jupiter rules the law. We talk about Jupiter a lot with ruling information and the higher mind and the third eye. But in mundane astrology, Jupiter rules the law. And so we're talking about court. We're talking about the police. And so remember that when we're talking about the news and what we're being shown, this stuff has been going on for years. Capricorn. People have been getting away for the crazy ass shit forever. Now, this woman who was charged, she is a very wealthy finance person who has means. And because, again, social media, there was a huge uprising. People have been protesting outside. She's got a whole social contingent nationally that is demanding reform, blah, blah, blah. The powers that be that used to get away with shit can't get away with shit anymore, right? And so this is a positive thing. This is all not negative. It's this notion of Aquarian tribe breaking down the structures of Capricorn. Now, there's low sides of Aquarius, and I'll talk about that when I talk about Pluto going into Aquarius, but you can already kind of anticipate what I'm going to talk about. AI, robots, us becoming robots, productivity hacks, and fucking all this stuff just being our brains being robotic. robotic is not quite the same thing as being numbed out, but you can see how they can work together, right? You numb people out and then you turn them into robots, right? Now we're going to get into Jupiter and Gemini, the historics of the transits and what to expect. And I already kind of alluded to what to expect in the first episode. I have no idea what I said, so I might repeat some stuff, but this is going to be a little bit more just historic fact. And I guess what I wanted you to take away from the first part of this episode is, number one, this is not happening in isolation. This is happening in the frame of Pluto in Capricorn last degree, Neptune in Pisces last degree. Pretty powerful that, we've got, by the way, at the time of this recording, Pluto is technically not in Capricorn. It'll re-enter Capricorn in September 1st, right around the time that Neptune, basically to the day that Neptune leaves the last degree of Pisces. It'll then go backwards like to 28, 27, something like that. But you get what I'm saying. Okay, so a lot of changing of the guard as this Gemini shit's happening. That is the vibe I wanted to tell you. And the other reason that I felt the need to record this podcast now, which now I'm realizing, why am I recording this today? I had so much else to do, is today is the last day of the Gemini moon cycle, of course. So in about 3 hours, we're going to have a Cancer new moon. And then we'll be in the Cancer moon cycle. And right now we're in Cancer season, but this Jupiter in Gemini transit happened during Gemini season. Coincidence. It was, I think, late May. And it happened, it was Memorial Day weekend. And I'm recording this like July 4th weekend. So it was late May. And was that the Cancer? It was very, very soon, right before the Gemini new moon. So most of the time that Gemini has been in Jupiter has been in Gemini so far, we've been in like a triple Gemini. And a lot of this Gemini energy we've been feeling has nothing to do with the fact that Jupiter is in Gemini, because now we're leaving this kind of micro Gemini energy. And the only planet in Gemini is going to be Jupiter. And if it's not obvious from the way I communicate, this isn't about your chart. And this isn't about like a month, a day, or whatever. It doesn't matter that Jupiter went to Gemini May 26th. And I already did a part 1. This is the bigger picture. This is like, oh shit, we're going to have Jupiter in Gemini until the end of May. And then a year from now, we're going to have Uranus enter Gemini. And all of what I'm talking about will become much more collective, because Uranus is 2 things. It's a collective planet, it's an electric planet, and it is a change agent. Wherever Uranus is, it breaks things and it changes things. It's going to be a very different energy than Uranus and Taurus, which has been a fixed earth sign. So it's had to break a lot of things on earth that didn't work. Gemini is a lot more mutable, but you've got Uranus, which is electricity, and Gemini, which is communication, mutable air. I'm already like, holy crap. I think, things are going to just speed up very, very fast. If you already are one of these people like me who's like, holy shit, time is literally evaporating. I don't think we've seen anything yet. I think time is going to become like such a mutable concept very soon that it's going to be kind of hard for us as humans who are in these physical bodies and have physical tasks we have to do on Earth to really ascertain. All right. So now let's talk about themes across Jupiter transits. So essentially, Jupiter, largest planet in the solar system, goes through each sign of the zodiac every year, about. And so it seeds major themes associated with that sign. And so what we're having, and we're going to have for the next year, outside of business, I've done a separate thing on business, this is macro collective, is major changes in telecommunications. And it's also indicated major changes in the way we communicate and news and transportation. So we're going to go backwards to go forwards. And we're going to start with 4 times ago when Jupiter was in Gemini. And I'm doing that for a reason. First of all, I was born in 1977. So to channel Montel Jordan, this is how we do it. And I want to talk about 2 times that Jupiter was in Gemini prior to the internet and 2 times after. Because we can say a lot of things about, we have a faster cell phone, or, there's a new social media account, or now we've got TikTok or whatever. But for those of you who are old enough like me to have lived before the internet and to have lived before cell phones, there is a chasm. We will never go back to that time. We might have advances in social media, and now we have kids that are literally born with TikTok in their hands when they come out of the womb. Their brains are going to be different, and they're going to communicate differently than us. But in terms of 1999 and before, that was the year I graduated from college. And shortly after I graduated from college, and it was quite the .com whatever, and I had a flip phone. And my first job, I had a flip phone. And so that really changed the way that we communicate. Before, remember, you could not get in touch with people unless they were like, it just changed the game. And so I want to go back to that time. And then during 1977 to early 78, we had a revolution in personal computing. We had Apple II was introduced, Commodore was introduced, home computing, people being able to communicate with people from home and just work with computers at home, changed. Star Wars was released in early 77, and that changed the game in terms of movies and kind of like sci-fi becoming mainstream, right? And from a telecom perspective, huge leaps in fiber optics happened. There was a lot of women entering male-dominated fields. And one thing that is not often talked about with Gemini is gender bending. So Gemini rules the twins, and there is a gender neutrality aspect to Gemini. Prince was a Gemini, and he was very much fluid in that, not fluid in terms of his sexuality, but he always made you guess. He's a very straight man, but he'd run around in underwear on stage, and he just was like, he changed the paradigm of what beliefs you had about men, women, and all that kind of stuff, right? He was just very, was part of his aura, right? He was you couldn't tell who he was, what he was. So that happened. We had the U.S. Department of Energy established, which really changed transportation and so forth and so on. So these are just like major advancements in technology, and Ma Bell was formed. Ma Bell, the telephone company, huge. Now that was broken up later when Uranus was in Sagittarius in 1984, but that's a really big deal because that was a huge regulation in telecommunications, and that was the first telephone system and fiber optic system established. So these are just seeds of change, right? And that's something to be aware of. I'm going to brush over these older ones rapidly since our world has changed quite a bit since then. Jupiter in Gemini was next around from 1989 to 1990. And this was the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it changed global information flow. This was the World Wide Web was introduced. The Hubble telescope launched. And the first flip phone was introduced by Motorola. I don't remember, but I think my first phone was a Motorola flip phone. Hello, telecommunications meets technology. That is what the themes of the last times that Jupiter were in Gemini. And what's interesting is if you listen to some of the stuff I'm telling you, and I'm only giving you a preview because this episode could be 2 hours long, is that a lot of this is technology based. So when I'm telling you all this stuff is, yes, it's telecommunications. And yes, it's the way we communicate, but it involves the internet or involves the news or involves software. And that's Uranus. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens over the next year that changes technology. I'm thinking AI, and then, which is kind of the biggest, quote, new advance since social media, people are saying, right? If there was the internet, then there was social media, then there's like AI. That's the biggest, quote, advancement we've had. Then, Uranus entering Gemini next year is going to be quite kind of epic. Now, the next two periods of times, which might be something you can more relate to, are that Jupiter was in Gemini from June of 2001 to July of 2002. Now, this was, prime.com era time, information technology, Wikipedia launched, right? News, peer news, if you will, debatable on its accuracy, but very, very different. A lot of broadband internet became a big thing. And a lot of music consumption and sharing. So again, sharing of information in an Aquarian fashion, but this is this social aspect to it, this collective tribal aspect to it. Because I am talking about collective energies, I'm having to bring in stuff that's, quote, sounds very Aquarian. So if you were to be a pure play astrologer, Gemini rules your day-to-day environment. It's associated with your cousins, your siblings, your classmates, your neighbors. But we don't live that way anymore. We're going back to that way of living, where you might have a local coffee shop and then you go to a garden, a community garden, and maybe you chit chat with your neighbor, and that's your world. But even if that is your world, it's very likely that unless you've gone off grid, you have a whole other way that you're communicating with the hive mind, the 11th house, which is associated with Aquarius. So in my mind, this Gemini Aquarius is blending, because what is what? I mean, half of my friends are like online or Reddit or Threads or Instagram, or, those are more tribal than YouTube, but YouTube's still kind of a collective thing, but you get what I'm trying to say. And then you have your day-to-day community. And there was a change in security measures in airports post 9/11. And so it really, really changed security protocols and the way that security and national security communicate in ways we're never going to know. It's all hidden. And they're tracking stuff all the times, whatever they're tracking on our phones and tracking our behaviors and all that. A lot of the things that are now allowed with how they track us were instituted after that 9/11, right? They could justify a lot of tracking of people's movements and tracking their cell phone under the guise of U.S. security or, government security, public interest, if you want to say. And let's finally get into the last time that Jupiter was in Gemini. And that was from 2013 through 2014. And we all know social media boom. We had video sharing on Instagram. It passed 100 million active followers. There were Snapchat stories. Selfie was the Oxford Dictionary word of the year. Edward Snowden leaked NSA documents. So there was a whole thing on privacy and surveillance. Gender identity conversations started to come about. Not like we have now, but you get what I'm saying. This couple of years have been insane because we've had the nodes and signs ruled by Venus and Mars, and now Mars and Venus. It's going to clear up. We're going to get better. So what are the themes? Social media, technology, surveillance, the news, some gender stuff, and just overall telecommunications. And so with Jupiter and Gemini this year, we're going to see it just changes. And I can tell you, as someone who is collective energies, I have a majority of collective gates in my human design chart, and is someone who is a business owner who is not super active on social media, but I'm in social media, I'm in the communities. People are getting sick of social media. Social media, they say, they're like, it feels like a dead zone. People are like The Walking Dead on there. People are just kind of like, I think things are going to change in a big way in the way that people share information online. I think things are going to move a lot more into private communities, quote, gated social media, just different types of ways that people communicate. I think people are getting sick and tired of, a lot of stuff being, quote, gate kept by Meta. And, Meta is moving more and more towards AI, and it's kind of worrying a lot of people. Uranus is the planet associated with Aquarius, which is the collective mind. And I think as Uranus enters Gemini, we're just going to have a different way of communicating. When Uranus entered Aries in 2011, that's when Instagram started. And that's when selfies took off, and YouTube really became a thing. And I'm not to say that we are not going to have social media or YouTube or any of this stuff in 2025, but it's going to be different. And I don't think we're going to rely on it as much. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see. And finally, before I kind of run out of steam on this, just be aware of the fact that Neptune is at the last degree of Pisces for like 90% of the time, the last degrees of Pisces, for like 90% of the time that Jupiter is in Gemini. With an election year, with a lot of fear mongering about the economy, with a lot of covering up of what's happening in politics and police and courts, and even stuff that's happening with our celebrities, who a lot of celebrities, in my opinion, are just a front for government shit that's going down. Did I mention it on the last podcast that there was a When there was a guy who was captured a few years ago. He did something crazy at Mar-a-Lago. He was shooting up the place, and they interviewed him and kept the FBI tapes, and somebody released them. And basically he was talking about how P. Diddy was running a sex trafficking thing, and how the hip hop industry was a front for liquid cocaine and all this stuff. And it all sounded batshit, right? But a lot of what he said was true. So I don't think we actually are ever going to really know what's happening. Even if there's a couple of celebrities who, quote, go down, there is a whole structure operating at a global level behind the scenes that needs to be fundamentally taken down. I don't know if it's going to happen now, but it wouldn't surprise me. I feel like every day we have some crazy shit happening, and that is a big part of what's happening behind the scenes of this Jupiter and Gemini. You're having this collective takedown of the structures that be. And then you're having this Neptunian delusion of what is actually being shared with us online. And how are they numbing us out and distracting us with other things so we're not actually paying attention to what's going on? You get it. You're an Aquarian. I thank you for listening. I apologize it took me so long to get this final episode up here, but I wanted it to be when it was meant to be. And when I realized the day I was recording it, just literally hours before the Gemini moon cycle ends, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for listening to Cosmic Alarm Clock. Ask questions, comment, like this video if you want more people to see this, because YouTube is not going to show this video to anybody unless you allow that to happen. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.